Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, class. This is the Chapter 25 SUPA lecture, which deals with World War II. It's a 10-slide PowerPoint. Today we're going to get into slides 1 through 5, which is really essentially slides 2 through 5, because slide 1 is the title World War I. And I don't want to waste any of your time. Let's jump right into slide 2, the World at War. So when we look at World War II, World War II begins on the other side of the globe. You have the Japanese who bring the war into China in the early 1930s. And throughout the 1930s, you have Benito Mussolini and the Italians who bring the war to North Africa when they invade Ethiopia. And then, you have the rise of Hitler, who brings war in Europe with the Nazi Party in the 1930s. And, he basically takes total control of the government and, turns, Germany into a military machine, helping getting them out of their depression. So, these three powers bring war to three different continents. You have war in Africa, Asia, and Europe. And where is the United States? On the other side of the globe. Sorry. So, shifting to slide 3, we talk about U.S. isolation. You had many Americans who essentially believed that we should kind of cling to the foreign policy established by George Washington in the early years of this country, and that's to avoid entangling alliances. And what happens is in 1935, you get the first series of neutrality acts passed, and in those neutrality acts, we couldn't trade with nations that were belligerent or nations that were at war. The United States was trying to keep us out of this conflict. We did not want to jump into World War II. Come 1937, FDR gives his famous quarantine speech, and basically saying, we need to quarantine these aggressors. It's like an illness. It needs to stay over there. It needs to stay away from us. And what you generally start to see happen throughout the 1930s, we go from a more strict neutrality, like the 1935 Neutrality Acts, to more direct or indirect involvement. Shifting to slide 4, when we become more involved. 1939. It was in 1939 where the Neutrality Acts changed and we were allowed to sell weapons to the British, the French, and the Chinese. As the war became more dire in Europe and Asia and Africa, we started to provide more direct aid. There was a hook to it. It was on a cash and carry basis. So, payment had to be made and you had to come get it. All right, so if you think about that, there we're trying to avoid the mistakes that got us involved in World War I, when Americans were, sending weapons over to Europe, and, you had the sinking Lusitania, German unrestricted submarine warfare. We didn't want to repeat the same mistake, so you have to come get it. In 1940, we ratcheted up even more when we passed the Select Service Act, and you have 1.4 million men getting drafted and going to camp to get ready for war. We know, as a world power, it's only a matter of time before we get dragged into this conflict. And then in 1941, with the Lend-Lease Act, it's exactly as it is, exactly as it sounds, Lend-Lease. We start lending other countries weapons. So if you think about that, if we think your defense is necessary and vital to the United States, here, take some weapons. Give them back or give their dollar value back at the conclusion of the conflict. So the United States goes from being more strictly isolated to just letting our friends borrow weapons come 1941. Shifting to the final slide, slide 5, Pearl Harbor. All right. When we cut Japan off from oil supplies in the summer of 1941, we knew it was only going to be a matter of time before Japan brought the war to us. American intelligence agents did know that Japan was going to attack us. Obviously, we thought the attack was going to be in the Pacific. It was just a matter of when and where, and then that when and where was Pearl Harbor. Right? December 7th, 1941, the day that will live in infamy. In the early hours of the morning, Japan attacks. About 200 American planes get destroyed in 2 hours. Over 2,000 Americans dead, over 1,000 wounded. And with that event, we get sucked into World War II. And when we declare war on Japan, we're essentially, declaring war on Germany and Italy as well, because they're the Axis powers. So that was slides 1 through 5 of this PowerPoint. As always, if you have any questions, send me an email. And most importantly, I really miss you guys, and I hope you're all doing well. Take care.